Scheiße, jetzt habe ich es falsch gemacht. Jetzt habe ich versehentlich auf Stream starten gegangen und jetzt überträgt ihr hier, was ihr also auf dem Bildschirm gemacht hat. Ich habe versehentlich auf Stream starten gegangen, statt auf Vorschau starten. Und jetzt hat er übertragen, was ich auf dem Bildschirm gemacht habe. Das ist ein bisschen doof. Introduce yourself, I don't say much. And one minute. Good. Okay, we continue with today's lunch lecture, and we continue with the lunch lecture today, and we have Anna Bentkowska-Kafel here, who would say a few words to. Could we all listen here? We have the next lunch lecture for today, and it's Anna Bentkowska-Kafel who would like to have your attention, please.
Thank you, Harald. I would like to start by saying big thank you to the organizers, Harald and Liska, for the invitation. And they asked me to talk about the history of digital art history. This is not about nostalgia for outdated ideas and obsolete technologies. This is, first of all, to recognize the contribution made by earlier researchers and perhaps learn something from their work. We lost the remote control, by the way, the pilot. So
I can. Sure. Next slide.
Yes, please. So I was thinking how we can define digital art history. Someone asked yesterday, what is it? What is digital humanities? So what do we need to look at to be able to define what we do? So what's in the name? When did it all started? We can look at research practice, at the most significant projects and methods, and we can identify the applications of science and technology to art studies. We can identify what kind of expertise is required, who are the leading practitioners, also what kind of institutional framework is required. We need to appreciate the differences between digital art history in academia and in museums. I will also look at some learned societies and professional organizations we can join, and of course we need to also think about the virtual presence of the field or discipline. The most important aspect of this work, I believe, is theories, underpinning theories, and evidence of these theories, so historiography, writings. We also teach and we learn, so what's the required pedagogy and how we qualify as digital art historians. And the last thing where I will only touch upon are all the legal and ethical aspects. And I won't mention the word copyright. I will just welcome any new developments like open source and Creative Commons, which make our life so much easier. Excellent. So is it a field, is it a discipline, is it a set of methods which require the use of digital tools and computers? When the book titled Computers and the History of Art was published in 1989 and eventually recorded in various libraries, you can see in this library record that the cataloger just couldn't decide what discipline this book belongs to. So he said, no discipline assigned. And I believe this record goes back to probably 2002. Next. So the earliest mention in literature of digital art history I managed to locate in a paper published in 1997, and the paper was called Digital Art History, a New Field for Collaboration. And the authors don't say anything in the text. They don't the digital art history is only mentioned in the title. However, they make a number of valid points about the emerging new field, the larger implications of new electronic technologies for visual education and scholarship in the museums and academy. And they for example, distinguish between looking at images and working with images. In 2001, a chart, which stands for Computers and the History of Art, organized the first of its two conferences dedicated to digital art history. Both were held at the British Academy, and the proceedings were published online. So we have 2001, a conference on digital art history as subject in transition, and this conference proved so controversial that we decided to organize another conference the following year. This time we added a question mark to digital art history, but we were already able to address the implication of working in network society. For the conference in 2001, Eric Fernie, the director of the Courtauld Institute of Art, was invited to give the keynote, and he was absolutely against the idea of digital art history. He questioned the very concept of digital art history as a subject separate from the traditional history of art. He discussed areas of study and research in which the use of the computer has effectively increased our control, scope, and accessibility to the material under scrutiny. But he was inclined to see digital art history as a method rather than a new discipline or subject. And of course, in recent years, we saw great interest in digital art history with many conferences, workshops, summer institutes, and new journals in the US and in Europe and probably in other parts of the world. So I picked these three covers as milestones. The 2005, another book published by Chart, Digital Art History, with some papers from these two conferences held at the British Academy, but also with an additional material. Then 2013, a special issue of a major international journal of documentation, again the digital art history on the cover, and finally the journal which probably brought us, or the interest of the editors which brought us all here. So thank you to Harald and Liska for undertaking such a huge and difficult initiative, and best of luck for keeping up with this project. So I mentioned that in literature, the first use of digital art history, at least I located in 1997. However, in 1990, Birkbeck College introduced master's program called Computer Applications for the History of Art, which was subsequently renamed to MA in Digital Art History. So by the time of the first conference at the British Academy, we already had a dozen cohorts of art historians with a degree, master's degree in digital art history. Berbeck at the time was very much involved in imaging research. There was a European project called Vasari, Visual Art System for Archiving and Retrieval of Images. And it involved many European institutions, the National Gallery in London and also the Dürer Institute in Munich. A prototype camera was constructed to enable digitization directly from of the paintings in the Alte Pinakothek and at the National Gallery in London. This work continued with two projects using acronyms MARC, which stands for Methodology for Art Reproduction in Color. This was all about trying to reproduce color accurately with large, by standards of the day, large image files of colorimetric data from paintings. So today, digital art history, MA in digital art history is offered by Duke. Victoria Sabo, who is here with us, is teaching on this program. And this MA evolved from the MA in historical and cultural visualization. So, and this still remains the focus on visualization techniques and analysis and presentation of research. However, I think that we should go back, and you will be pleased that I won't start with the Romans, but I think we should really carefully look at the 1960s, what was going on with artists exploring the relationship between computing, programming, applications of science and technology. And some of the manifestos, art theories of the time remained very influential. We of course need to look at the political and social context of the time. They were, of course, either artists with scientific background, or it was all about collaborating with scientists, and a number of significant art exhibitions were held in London, in Zagreb, in other parts, in other countries. So all the critical discourse around this art practice and curating digital data, this is very much relevant to what we do today. So if you, of course, there was no PC and no graphic user interfaces as we know them today. The term computer graphics is believed to have been introduced by William Fetter in 1960. These were the times of men in white coats and big mainframes. The photograph is of Edward Ignatowicz. Next one, please. Also at this time, the Computer Arts Society was established as a specialist group of British Computer Society, but it still exists today and is very active. And it's an international society. They started, they were established to encourage the creative use of computers in the arts and allow the exchange of information in this area. So not just art for the art's sake, but also as a critical reflection on the political, social aspects and the flow of information and propaganda in times of Cold War and Iron Curtain in Europe.
May I ask something?
Sure.
Who's Gustav Metzger? Is that an artist? What kind of person is that?
Give me a moment, yes. You saw another German name, Frieder Nake, still very much active. So they started publishing a magazine called Page. All these numbers, all these old issues have been digitized and are available on the Computer Arts Society website. And the first editor was Gustav Metzger, who published a manifesto of auto-destructive art, but also of auto-creative art, and he wrote about automata in history. And he was a visiting lecturer at Roy Ascott's foundation course at Ealing Art College in London. And Roy Ascott was very much involved in cybernetics. The students worked, for example, on games and studied human behavior. They had no computers, by the way. So all these ideas around robotics, artificial intelligence, even artificial life, the interaction, the information aesthetics, data aesthetics. Next one, please. And one of the prominent artists was Harold Cohen, who had this idea to create a machine, a computer artist. And he called it Aaron. And initially, Aaron was producing abstract black and white images, and eventually he managed to teach Aaron to create figurative art in color. An influential idea was that of Saul Levitt. The idea becomes a machine that makes the art. Next one. A place to go to study early computer art is surprisingly perhaps the prints and drawing room at the Victoria and Albert in London, because much of this art exists as printouts. Next one. And also, it's rich in world computer art. There is a collection of works by Argentinian artists of the 1960s. Edward Ignatowicz experimented with robotics, and he's known for 2 sculptures, installations created one in the 1968 sound-activated mobile, and another one commissioned by Philips and exhibited in Philips Pavilion Woluwe in Eindhoven, in Holland. And all these sculptures were either voice or gesture activated. And recently there was a project at the Victoria and Albert Museum, and some was reconstructed and 3D printed. So some of these practice-based questions are stimulate discussion around authenticity, what's original in art, what's if you want to buy a piece of art from, let's say, Michael Takao-Magruder, and he creates digital artworks which are often displayed as part of an immersive environment and rely on live stream of data. So when you deal with this kind of art, you question almost everything in traditional art history and the way we exhibit and curate art. Next one. So I like to use this quote from Roger Malina, who said about computer art and artists working with digital media, that the unique computer tools available to the artist, such as those of image processing, visualization, simulation, and network communication, are tools for changing, moving, and transforming, not fixing digital information. And I think this is perhaps the critical differences when we use exactly the same image processing, visualization, simulation, and other digital tools in scholarship. Because the tendency is to fix data, or at least control it, whereas in art anything goes, and the computer can lead and take over. So in the area of digital art scholarship, we have a number of very important initiatives. The Getty Art History Information Program was established in 1983, and they, as we all know, created all the bibliographic resources, databases, controlled vocabularies, which we are using today, and they are still evolving and are being translated into other languages. The Art and Architecture Thesaurus is now being translated into Chinese. And they now work on linked open data, and for years they've been working on metadata standards, and they also supported a number of collaborative projects and workshops and conferences in other countries. And the conference, which was held in Pisa in 1984 on automatic processing of art history data and documents, is regarded as one of these milestones in arts computing. And another initiative by Getty was concerned with images. It started in 1994. So Chart, Computers and the History of Art was established in 1985, and it was a group which whose members included and still do art historians, museum professionals, design historians, but also artists and media practitioners, also computer scientists. So unlike Getty focusing strictly on research, Chart also provides a forum for artists. And Chart has been publishing a newsletter right from the beginning, and then a journal, an academic journal published by Harwood in Switzerland. Then we made several attempts to produce yearbooks, but somehow the year became more than 12 months. Yes, next one. So I don't want to talk about some negative criticism of digital art history. Somehow we have the notorious reputation for being slow and behind. It just depends, how you. I think I provided enough evidence that we are not behind. Maybe our voice is just not strong enough to be heard, or maybe some people don't want to hear what arts computing is all about. But I will quote from a post by Hubertus Kohl to Digital Humanities discussion list. My colleague, a famous Renaissance specialist, told me that as long as we cannot show him the real use of what we call digital art history, he will not be interested in it. Well,
I might know who that Renaissance
specialist is. Luckily, I don't know. But I don't understand why he or she, he can't find out by himself. No, why he needs to be told or showed. So anyway, to this unknown Renaissance specialist, I would like to refer quickly to a few examples. And I think the application of computing to Renaissance studies is the least controversial of all other applications. There were so many notable projects, and I will refer to the Alberti project, which started with a photogrammetric survey of Alberti's buildings. And of course they are interesting because they were built differently. They differ from the original designs. Most were never finished or substantially altered in due course. So the computer gives this opportunity to see how the original designs would have looked like if they were executed. But also, I think, evidence the benefit of using these methods to study the developments in proportional theory and design process in Renaissance, relationships between the theory and practice of geometrical perspective. And another point to make when showing a still image of a computer model scanned from a paper published in the 90s is, of course, about these models becoming obsolete. And the reason why they are obsolete is not because we don't have the means or technology to migrate this data to current formats. It's just that we want better tools now. So this is always perhaps worth thinking, where what I'm doing now will be in 10, 20, or 50 years' time. So, as part of the Alberti project, Piero della Francesca's flagellation was also 3D modeled and used to revise earlier research into this enigmatic painting. The subject is subject of debate, the architectural setting, the source of light, and by having a computer model, Robert Tavener, who is an architectural historian, but he also translated Alberti's 10 books on architecture into English, so he has this insightful knowledge of Alberti's theoretical work, and also as an architect, good understanding of the architectural space. He was able to, as he believes, correct earlier findings about where exactly is the source of light in this painting, and how we can add or correct earlier interpretations. And of course there are many other methods of working on 3D data derived from two-dimensional metrology, and Antonio Criminisi, Martin Kemp, and Andrew Zimmerman are some of the scholars, computer scientists working in this area. However, it would be wrong to assume, and this is a mistake I made once about the work of Marilyn Arenberg-Landin, when I thought that this is the 3D computer model is primarily for studying geometry. She's Piero della Francesca scholar, and she was particularly interested in the organization of Piero's frescoes, the sequence. You can establish the narrative sequence of individual scenes, and for not only practical reasons, not to have to build a scaffolding to see the fresco high up in the church, but also to be able to play with these images and look at the iconography as well as into details of the paintings. She worked with Kirk Alexander to create the 3D model of the Capella Maggiore of San Francesco in Arezzo, but started with a database of some 280 images of paintings. So, and she started in the late 1980s, and amazingly, this 3D computer model is still accessible on Princeton's website. Now I would like to move to a different method in the history of art, iconography, or even iconology, and would like to talk about one particular aspect of my own research into this kind of early modern imagery. And someone yesterday said, faces are the easiest things to look at because they are regular. So, for some, the perception of this image will vary from person to person. Some of you immediately see a face in the landscape. But some will have to have these paintings reversed to see they are double images, so not just the landscape, but also it's a landscape in human form. And if you are interested in such imagery, and the images of this kind were not made by major artists, they are mostly anonymous. They cannot be classified as landscapes, or if they are catalogued as landscapes, you miss this anthropomorphic aspect of it. You can say it's a woman, it's a man, old, young, wearing a necklace, but you can't call them portraits. So how do you classify these kinds of images, and first of all, how do you retrieve such images from a collection? There are many repetitions of the same composition, so you want to see how one composition depends on the other. You want to establish the chronology, which of the many paintings I managed to locate could be a model for later compositions, what are the differences between the individual motifs, and based on iconology as devised by Edwin Panofsky, you start this kind of investigation with the pre-iconographic analysis, which is strictly formal and should not use any semantic descriptors. This is quite difficult to do with well-known subjects, so it's difficult to talk about the crucifixion without naming it straight away. But in this particular case, it's quite useful. So, and you have to build, the suggestion is to build libraries of motifs. So in this case, I was looking, what elements of landscape are used to represent an eye. How our noses are made. And this, led me to some other investigations. Next one. This is another example. So it's the same idea, but different composition. Next one. And of course, you can go great, So let's try to do some content-based image retrieval. And we talked about similarity and what's similar to us and to a machine. So probably the similarity between the handle of a teapot and a bent knee is probably some 70% or so, but this is not very helpful. And one of the pioneering projects in digital art history was the Morelli system. And it was developed by William Vaughan at Birkbeck. And he had this idea of comparing images based on visual similarity. Initially, just think 1980s, to have an image on the screen was already quite problematic, so he worked with black and white images. And I think at the beginning he was particularly interested in copies, replicas, versions of the same painterly composition. And the system was based on three different, you could have a 4x4 matrix or 32 by 32, 64 by 64, and the system had three different functions. You could sort images, match images looking for one which would be, or images similar to your query image.
It's query by example. What we
Yes,
have today at Google Image Search was done already.
Or fax queries. Yes. And the name Morelli, of course, refers to Giovanni Morelli, who in the 19th century had this idea of identifying the style of an artist by looking at anatomical features. So you would think that Botticelli would always paint an ear in the same way, and Botticelli's ear would be different from Rubens's ear. So I was using Morelli to see whether it could help with identifying anthropomorphic landscapes when Morelli was already translated into Windows environment. And it was only a test situation, so I had to first feed the database with the landscapes I already had and see whether my query image would retrieve all the images I put in the database. And the most successful program was Mavis, which was designed for a department store for customers to match in the furniture department. They could come with a sample of fabrics they use for their curtains, and they were looking for a sofa which would have, match the curtains. So I thought, okay, I can use it for anthropomorphic landscapes. And I was really pleased with the results because this particular system enabled me to match the details, not just the overall composition, but the details. So, we had a number of such systems introduced in picture libraries. In the British Museum, the British Library was using Virage for a period. Cubic was available until recently on the Hermitage website, where you could draw the outline of a particular composition you were looking for, or match colors. But and then there was a project called Sculpteur, where it was all about retrieving 3D images. So all sorts of experiments, but no really useful tool until now. Next one. And now we have Google, but it's only as good as the ability of retrieving the images which either are somewhere on the web or not. So rather accidental. And moving quickly to, so staying with 3D, but moving quickly to one of the frequently addressed problem of transparency and reliability of digital information, and how we teach students in particular to create visualizations, historical visualization, which do not pretend to be evidence when they are based on partial factual evidence. And John Pollini, the Department of Classics at the University of California in LA, this is by one of his students who just had this idea of using this is the word I can say, reliability meter, where in the virtual reconstruction of the mausoleum of Augustus, you set how reliable your visualization is depending on the elements you use to try to show how the structure might have looked like originally. And so this problem led a group of researchers involved in historical visualization to come up with a set of principles which could promote visualization as a scholarly method in historical studies. And one of, I would just draw your attention to one of the principles which recommends to record the process of visualization. So record all the sources you use and record the process to enable any changes when there is a new piece of evidence, or if anyone would like to suggest a different interpretation, and making the whole process transparent, therefore reliable. And the whole point is about knowing what we are looking at. This is an image of a virtual object, so we need ideally to have all metadata about the actual object, as well as all metadata about the virtual surrogate, as well as paradata about the process of coming from A to B, all recorded as part of the virtual artifact. Okay. And to bring this all more up to date, I would quickly refer to my most recent project, which was conducted as part of the European Cost Action, Color and Space in Cultural Heritage, which was concerned with the use of spatial and spectral optical technologies for recording objects of cultural heritage. And in this particular case study, we had two silver denarii, and we wanted to use them in dozens of tests involving 3D technologies and imaging, and to compare the results of recording these two coins between different setups. So let's say structural light and laser scanning, and how the results differ depending on the instrument calibration. Do we have the same record, or are there any differences? And also within the same technology. So we used 5 different polynomial texture mapping domes, again to image the same object and compare the results between different instruments and software and algorithms. And this is just some of the results. Of course, we wanted to authenticate the coins when we started. We assumed they are Roman denarii of Diva Faustina, but we were not sure. We wanted to, measure the silver content and also to assess the condition. So micro-CT showed all sorts of cracks. You can see using a magnifying glass. But the main objective of this project was to see whether we could suggest that coins in numismatic collections are recorded not just through photography, but that these records can be made part of standard museum object record, at least for some objects. It's impossible to apply such methods to all objects in a collection because they are extremely expensive and time-consuming, absolutely beyond the means of even the largest museums. They have other expenses they need to prioritize. But the main problem was really the lack of interest. Okay, and finally, I think we should be able to make we could have some kind of who is who in digital art history, and it wouldn't. I think it would not be possible to make a dictionary of eminent digital art historians, because as this list of just chart authors from a few years suggests, there are people representing different disciplines. So this is just a very interdisciplinary area. And I would like to conclude with just a few thoughts. Is new always novel? Is novel always innovative? How do we deal with different aspects of art history and different needs of academic research, of museum-based art history, where I think the interest in technology is partly driven by the public demand, and also, with the commercial side of the discipline, how technical art history, and the last example I showed, the heritage science, how this can influence the level of technical engagement in art historical scholarship, how we deal, we work globally, but how we care for the local interests, how digital art history interacts with virtual museology, with virtual archaeology. Are we part of digital humanities, or are we completely independent? Are we using art historical tools, or are we just using uni tools? What makes us different? And what's the role of digital scholarship in general, and how we can promote it? You've seen that I included a lot of bibliographic references for anyone who would like to maybe read some of this stuff. And okay. And the slides will be made available, of course. And I included a slide which I've been working on since 1999, and every time I want to show it, I have to change something in it. And this is my idea what digital art history involves, but I'm not sure whether we need the word digital. And documentation for me is definitely the core and starting point of everything. So thank you very much. Let's not forget the smell of paint.
Exactly, yes. Don't forget the originals we are talking about, not only about data. So, are there any questions to our presenter?
Yeah, thank you for this talk, and thank you for including computer art at the very beginning. And my question will target that because I'm interested in your take on the connection between the kind of early computer art that you showed and digital art history, particularly taking into account, and maybe that's the second question, but particularly taking into account that computer art in the 60s was a very critical approach to technology, although it doesn't look like that. But I mean, Max Benzer was basically a conservative revolutionary, right? He's a positivist revolutionary with his information aesthetics approach. And do you think there is space for something? There's space for such criticism, but this kind of criticism in the digital humanities as well?
I think so, and I can speak from experience because at King's College London, at King's Visualization Lab, where I worked until recently, within the group of technical people who work on 3D visualization and historians, we had a colleague who was a digital artist, and we always learned so much from discussing research with him, and I think he also made our products look nicer, which is not always the case. But I think it's always important. At one of recent discussions at an early stage researchers think tank to do with this color and space and cultural heritage action, we had a lot of discussions involving computer scientists and art historians. And at some point, one computer scientist said, "Oh, I'm not creative. I'm a computer scientist." And I think this is wrong. We are all creative, always. When we stop being creative, I think we are dead. It's just, capitalizing on these different ideas about what being creative means. Using your brain is creative. I would like to think.
I'm sure you.
Yeah. Thank you for a wonderful talk. One thing I've always loved about your work is that you are very aware of making the reader aware of the limits of the digital, the limits of what you're digitizing, the constraints, the actual nature of the data. I thought that was beautifully driven home by your quote about how you can transform the data, you can manipulate it, but you can never just fix it digitally. That awareness seems to be being lost as we get kind of entranced by the lure of big data. And do you see that as something troublesome, the fact that people think once you get a hold of the data, you've gotten a hold of objective reality? Do you see that as a new trend, or do you think that's been like a subcurrent of digital humanities all along?
I think my problem perhaps is that I rarely see something as really new. Maybe this is why I'm a historian. I think it's all about how you present the results. We no longer work with drafts. We have always a final version. And we erase, unless we consciously, record stages in the process, we lose all the steps along the way. This is why this idea of paradata, maybe, it's not an ideal solution, and it's certainly sort of time-consuming, and, it's like 2 extra projects on top of the one you are doing. But I think this is the most, the most cognitive stage of any research, because this is when you make your decisions, and if you record these decisions, then the whole process, whether the results is good or bad, but everything makes sense. It shows how you arrived at your results, and also it reveals when you use wrong data.
Right.
And using wrong data is quite frequent. And being aware, that there is something wrong with data, it's already a good finding.
Wrong data, but what is right data? Can we ever get to perfectly right data? This is like the search for the total truth.
For art historians, this shouldn't be a problem. How often we deal with fakes, and we build all our interpretation on something, and then discover that this is not a 16th century painting. It's actually something made yesterday. And then, will your interpretation still hold?
I've got a question concerning your what you just said, like that you have to make every rational transparent, and that you have to kind of also make it obvious when you arrive at what decision or interpretation, and to gather data on that as well. I think that is what we call paradata, right?
Paradata is a record of the process.
Yes.
I think the word is borrowed from statistics.
Yeah.
So some people should be better positioned to.
So basically, what we want to include is that the process of the digital art historical analysis is traceable, right? But do you see that same principle being applied in traditional art history? because I mean most of the time when you read an art historical analysis, you kind of have to trust the author that he or she has been thorough in their research, because they don't make it traceable in their monography, for example. So you can maybe supply the reader with some image material, but you know the process of concluding and process of interpretation. I've never seen any classical art history book or paper that does that. So do we measure with two different approaches?
Well, but in any good scholarship, you need to provide evidence. So you need to list your sources.
Mm-hmm.
So this is already something. When you provide the evidence, you know what's your argument, where your argument comes from.
But if I was thorough in that process, I would also have to list where did I do my research, like where did I look for my sources, because I could just say like I went to this one library because I know that they have 3 books that support my argument, and just ignore 150 other libraries where I know there's newer or more more recent research that would counter my argument. And I don't supply a list with my monography on, I don't know, Mason's art, with a thorough documentation of my research process. And if I apply the same rigor to classical art history, I would have to do that to make them measurable, you know. So this is the question is more, does classical art history need to apply the same rigor in making their process of research traceable if they, talking about the ones that are skeptical, expect us in digital art history to do that at every single step of our process?
I'm not sure whether this is an expectation, but I think if we provide this information, it makes our research more reliable. And I think in any research project, you define the scope of the project. So if you use just 5 images, you say, I was using 5 images or 5 sources, and then no one can blame you that you didn't look at 100 other examples or sets of data.
Just had a question on some of the early software like Morelli. Has there been any effort to actually conserve those projects, to actually conserve the code for them, since they're inoperable? It's just one of the problems with the kind of obsolescence of technology and trying to kind of keep a historical record.
So first, William Vaughan is still around, so he may have his old machine. I think the code, you can read the code because the code was published. And it ended up with this EU Van Eyck project. And when I talked to the computer scientist involved in the project, he said that it was just so simple that there was no technical challenge to develop it any further.
Yeah. Well, that's good because I think just the potential for a loss of it, just like Sir talks about the kind of dark age, the kind of mass loss, especially these projects, kind of early web projects or projects from the 90s, just to kind of keep as kind of clear the historical portion as we can.
I think there is this renewed interest in media archaeology, and this is part of it.
Very good. If you have more questions, you can direct this directly to her. I thank you very much for this talk. Thank you for watching.